There is a bitter yellow Chinese root that matched a standard antibiotic for bacterial overgrowth in a 2015 trial, after being simmered in clay pots for 2,000 years. Chinese medicine treats the gut as a furnace that needs fuel, drainage, and protection in equal measure. Number 6 was reserved for Tang dynasty physicians and grows only on the roots of fallen pine trees. And number 3 is quietly rewriting how researchers treat irritable bowel syndrome. Starting at number 7 is Chen Pai, the dried and aged peel of the mandarin orange, and in southern China its value increases every year it sits on a shelf. In Xinhui County of Guangdong Province, Chen Pai, aged for 30 years, has sold at auction for more than $20,000 per kilogram, and families in the region pass down sealed ceramic jars of it the way Europeans pass down wine cellars. The Ming dynasty physician Li Shizhen wrote about it in the Compendium of Materia Medica, calling it the first herb you reach for when food sits in the stomach and refuses to move. It was prescribed for what classical doctors called stagnant qi of the middle burner, essentially bloating, fullness, and that heavy feeling after you have eaten something you should not have. The peel was sun-dried on bamboo mats on rooftops, then aged in sealed jars, gaining complexity the way whiskey gains complexity in oak. Here is where modern research gets interesting. Chen Pai is rich in polymethoxyflavones, specifically nobiletin and tangeretin, along with hesperidin and D-limonene. A 2019 randomized controlled trial published in the Journal of Ethnopharmacology followed patients with functional dyspepsia and found that Chen Pai extract accelerated gastric emptying by roughly 20% compared to placebo over 8 weeks. The mechanism involves activation of the 5-HT4 serotonin receptors in the gut wall, which trigger stronger smooth muscle contractions and push food through the stomach and small intestine more efficiently. Nobiletin also has measurable anti-inflammatory effects on the intestinal lining, reducing prostaglandin E2 production, which is part of why people report less post-meal discomfort within days of adding it to their routine. D-limonene, the same aromatic compound that gives the peel its sharp citrus perfume, has separately been shown to neutralize excess stomach acid and soothe esophageal reflux in a 2008 clinical trial, where roughly 75% of heartburn sufferers reported symptom relief within 2 weeks of daily dosing. A 2022 animal study also found that daily nobiletin administration increased the population of boterit-producing Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, one of the most important keystone species in a healthy human colon, which helps explain why Chen Pai has been used continuously for dysbiosis-type complaints for the better part of 1,000 years. If you want to try it, look for authentic Guangdong Xinhui Chen Pai aged at least 3 years. The color should be a deep reddish brown, not bright orange. Simmer about 5 grams of dried peel in hot water for 10 minutes and drink it as a tea 20 minutes after heavy meals. The aroma is complex, citrus, dried wood, and something almost like aged whiskey. And the effect on bloating is usually noticeable by the 2nd or 3rd day of consistent use. And that brings us to number 6. Fu Ling, also known as Poria cocos, a subterranean fungus that grows exclusively on the roots of pine trees that have already died. In the Shen Nong Bencao Jing, the oldest surviving Chinese pharmacopoeia, Fu Ling was classified as a top-grade herb, meaning it could be taken long-term without harm. During the Tang dynasty, imperial physicians reserved the highest quality specimens for the emperor's apothecary, and entire forests in Yunnan and Anhui were managed for centuries specifically to cultivate it. Foragers still hunt for it the old way, tapping pine stumps with iron rods and listening for the hollow sound that signals a mature fungus buried in the soil below. The traditional use was to drain dampness from the middle burner, which translated into modern terms meant treating sluggish digestion, loose stools, water retention, and that foggy, heavy feeling after eating starches. Fu Ling's active compounds include pashiman, perchemic acid, and a family of triterpenoids unique to this fungus. The polysaccharide pashiman is fermentable by beneficial gut bacteria, functioning as a prebiotic that selectively feeds bifidobacterium and lactobacillus populations. A 2020 study in the International Journal of Biological Macromolecules used a mouse model of ulcerative colitis and found that Fu-Ling polysaccharides reduced colonic inflammation markers by approximately 40% while increasing microbial diversity. The mechanism involves inhibition of the NF-kappa B inflammatory pathway and upregulation of short-chain fatty acid producers, butyrate in particular, which feeds the cells lining your colon. A separate 2017 clinical trial in patients with diarrhea-predominant irritable bowel syndrome showed significant reduction in bowel frequency and urgency after 12 weeks of Fu-Ling-containing formulas, with roughly 65% of participants reporting meaningful symptom improvement. Pachimic acid has also demonstrated direct action on the smooth muscle of the intestinal wall, calming the spasms that drive cramping pain in IBS patients and reducing visceral hypersensitivity in animal models. A 2019 study in rats with stress-induced gastric ulcers found that Fu-Ling extract reduced ulcer area by approximately 55%, likely through a combination of prostaglandin preservation and calming of the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, which is the same stress pathway that drives so many modern digestive complaints. The most reliable way to use it today is either as sliced Fu-Ling in a traditional decoction. It is the base of the classical Sijunzi Tang, the Four Gentlemen decoction, or as a fine white powder stirred into rice congee. The slices themselves look like chalky pale cubes, almost like compressed marshmallow, and the taste is surprisingly mild and almost neutral, which is why classical Chinese physicians called it the perfect herb for delicate digestion. 5 to 10 grams per day is the standard therapeutic range for most adults. Number 5 is Baizhu, the rhizome of Atractylodes macrocephala, often called the queen of ketonics in Chinese herbal medicine. The finest Baizhu comes from Zhejiang province, where the mountain soil and humidity produce rhizomes with the highest concentration of essential oils. A pale yellow core with a faintly sweet, earthy aroma. Its role was codified in the Han Dynasty by Zhang Zhongjing, whose treatise on cold damage used Baizhu as the cornerstone of dozens of formulas for what he called spleen qi deficiency, a syndrome that maps remarkably well onto modern descriptions of chronic bloating, fatigue after eating, and mucosal inflammation of the gut. Imperial court records show it was prescribed to the Qianlong Emperor, who lived to 87, as part of his daily digestive tonic, and similar formulas were issued to palace women during pregnancy to prevent morning sickness and stabilize appetite. The pharmacology is dense. Baizhu contains atractylenolide 1, 2, and 3, along with a family of polysaccharides that researchers abbreviate as AMP. A 2017 meta-analysis in the journal Phytomedicine pooled data from 14 trials on functional dyspepsia and found that Baizhu-based formulas improved symptom scores by roughly 50% compared to control groups, with particular benefit for patients whose primary complaint was post-meal fullness. At the cellular level, atractylenolide 1 downregulates TNF-alpha and interleukin-6, two inflammatory cytokines consistently elevated in inflammatory bowel disease, while the polysaccharides restore mucosal integrity by stimulating goblet cell production of the mucus that coats and protects the intestinal lining. A 2019 study in mice with induced colitis showed that Baizhu extract restored mucosal barrier function within 3 weeks of administration and reduced bacterial translocation through the gut wall by nearly 60%. A 2021 trial in humans with chronic functional diarrhea found that a standardized Baizhu extract reduced weekly stool frequency from roughly 14 episodes to 6 after 8 weeks of use, with benefits persisting for months after discontinuation. The volatile oils in the rhizome, particularly atractylan, also relax gastric smooth muscle during spasm while tonifying it during atony, which is a genuinely unusual dual action that traditional herbalists recognized centuries before anyone could measure it. Today, you'll most often find it as Chow Baizhu, meaning it has been stir-fried with wheat bran to enhance its digestive effects. The stir-frying darkens the rhizome to a toasted amber and deepens its grounding action on the stomach. 5 to 10 grams simmered in water. For 20 minutes makes a mild, earthy decoction. It is also the second ingredient in the Four Gentlemen decoction, which remains one of the most widely prescribed digestive formulas in Chinese hospitals today. And now we move to number 4, huangqi, known in the West as astragalus, a root whose name translates literally as yellow leader because of its dusty golden color and its hierarchical position among Chinese tonics. It has been cultivated for more than 2,000 years, and in the 12th century the physician Li Dongyuan built an entire school of thought around it, the spleen-stomach school, arguing that most chronic illness began with a weakened digestive system and that huangqi was the foundation of repair. Li Dongyuan treated soldiers returning from the Jinsong Wars, whose chronic wasting and poor digestion responded to huangqi when nothing else did, and his clinical records documented recovery in patients who had been bedridden for months. It was also prescribed to women recovering from childbirth in a dish called huangqiji Tang, a slow-simmered chicken soup that is still made in households across northern China every winter. Modern research has validated nearly all of this. Huangqi contains astragalosides, especially astragaloside 4, along with cycloestragonol and a class of polysaccharides called APS. A 2018 randomized controlled trial published in Evidence-Based Complementary and Alternative Medicine studied patients with ulcerative colitis and found that adding huangqi to standard therapy reduced the Mayo Disease Activity Index by 35% more than standard therapy alone over 12 weeks. The root works on the gut in 3 simultaneous ways. It shifts the microbiome composition toward Akkermansia mucinifila, a keystone bacterium associated with a healthy mucus layer and lower systemic inflammation, with some studies showing 3 to 4-fold increases in Akkermansia abundance. It upregulates MUC2, the gene responsible for producing the thick mucus coat that physically separates gut bacteria from the intestinal wall, and it modulates immune cell activity in the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, balancing Th1 and Th2 responses that, when skewed, drive food sensitivities, eczema flares, and autoimmune reactions. A 2020 Chinese hospital trial in Crohn's patients reported remission rates of 68% in the huangqi group compared to 42% on standard therapy alone. Separately, astragaloside 4 has been shown to upregulate beta-defensin production in intestinal epithelial cells, which are the body's own antimicrobial peptides that selectively kill pathogens without harming beneficial flora, a mechanism that finally explains why huangqi was historically paired with the blood-nourishing root dangui in the classical formula, dangui bouge tang, for patients recovering from prolonged illness. The traditional preparation is sliced huangqi simmered for an hour in chicken soup, which pulls the astragalosides into the broth. Modern options include standardized tinctures and powders. Look for extracts labeled with at least 0.4% astragaloside 4 to ensure you are getting a therapeutic dose, typically 1 to 3 grams of dried root equivalent daily. That brings us to number 3, huanglian, the bright yellow rhizome of Coptis chinensis, and probably the single most intensely bitter herb in the entire Chinese pharmacy. It is so cold in its energetic profile that classical texts warned against using it for more than a few weeks at a time. In the Han Dynasty, during plague outbreaks that swept through the Yellow River Valley, huanglian was the centerpiece of formulas like huanglian ji du Tang, the Coptis decoction to relieve toxicity, prescribed for what we would now recognize as bacterial dysentery and severe food poisoning. Physicians traveling with Ming Dynasty armies carried it in oilcloth pouches as a field remedy for the bloody diarrhea that routinely killed more soldiers than combat wounds. It was the antibiotic of its era, and the evidence that it actually works has only strengthened in the last 2 decades. Huanglian's primary active compound is berberine, along with copticine, palmitine, and jatorizine. A 2015 randomized controlled trial in the World Journal of Gastroenterology compared berberine directly against rifaximin, the standard pharmaceutical for small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and found comparable eradication rates at the 4-week mark with fewer side effects in the berberine group. A 2020 meta-analysis pooling 11 trials on diarrhea predominant irritable bowel syndrome showed that berberine reduced symptom severity scores by roughly 45% compared to placebo. The mechanism is multi-layered. Berberine selectively suppresses pathogenic bacteria, like certain strains of E. coli and Clostridioides difficile, while sparing beneficial species. It activates AMP, activated protein kinase, inside intestinal cells, which stabilizes mitochondrial function and reduces inflammatory cytokine production. It reshapes bile acid metabolism, which in turn remodels the gut microbiome over weeks of consistent use. And it tightens gut barrier integrity by modulating occludin expression, which is one reason berberine shows benefit in what clinicians loosely call leaky gut syndrome. A 2022 trial in metabolic patients found that 3 months of berberine also reduced serum markers of intestinal permeability by roughly 30%. A separate Chinese hospital trial in ulcerative colitis patients reported that berberine combined with standard mesalazine improved clinical remission rates from 47% to 73% over 16 weeks, suggesting a genuinely synergistic effect with conventional treatment rather than competition with it. Today, standardized berberine hydrochloride is available as 500 milligram capsules, typically taken 2 or 3 times daily with meals. For traditional preparation, small doses of huanglian can be decocted, but the bitterness is genuinely unpleasant, the kind that makes your face twist and lingers on the tongue for 10 minutes. Whichever form you choose, it is meant for cycles of 4 to 8 weeks, not continuous long-term use, and should not be combined with prescription antibiotics without guidance. Number 2 is shengjiang, fresh ginger root. And while it sits in every Western grocery store, its medical pedigree in China runs deeper than almost any other kitchen ingredient. Fresh ginger has been cultivated in southern China for at least 2,500 years, with archaeological records from the Western Han period showing ceramic ginger pots sealed in the tombs of noble families. Zhang Zhongjing's Han Dynasty texts reference ginger in more formulas than nearly any other single herb. It was the primary treatment for what classical physicians called cold in the middle, a constellation of symptoms including nausea, vomiting, loose stools, and a feeling of icy heaviness after eating. Fishermen and travelers along the Grand Canal were advised to chew raw slices before long voyages, and the traditional Chinese remedy for morning sickness was essentially ginger, honey, and rice water, taken 3 times daily from the first weeks of pregnancy. The pharmacology is unusually well characterized. Fresh ginger's active compounds are the gingerols, especially 6-gingerol, along with shogools and zingerone that form when ginger is dried or heated. A 2019 meta-analysis in Integrative Medicine Research analyzed 10 trials on chemotherapy-induced nausea and found that ginger reduced nausea severity by approximately 40% compared to placebo, with effects comparable to some pharmaceutical antiemetics. A 2008 study in the European Journal of Gastroenterology and Hepatology measured gastric emptying directly and found that 1.2 grams of ginger accelerated emptying by 25% in patients with functional dyspepsia. The mechanism involves activation of TRPV1 receptors in the stomach lining, which triggers stronger antral contractions, alongside serotonergic effects on the vomiting center in the brainstem. A 2014 trial in postoperative patients reported a 60% reduction in nausea when 1 gram of ginger was given before surgery. And a 2015 trial in pregnant women found that 250 milligrams of ginger 4 times daily reduced morning sickness scores as effectively as vitamin B6, without any increase in adverse events for mother or fetus. Chinese pharmacy also distinguishes between fresh shengjiang and dry roasted paojiang, the roasted form, processed over charcoal until blackened on the outside, was historically reserved for warming deep internal cold and stopping chronic diarrhea, while fresh ginger was used for acute nausea and upper digestive complaints. For daily use, a simple preparation is 3 or 4 slices of fresh ginger simmered in water for 10 minutes, consumed 20 minutes before meals, the kind of pale golden broth you can feel warming the stomach within minutes of the first sip. Capsules standardized to 5% gingerols work equally well, typically 500 milligrams 2 or 3 times daily for nausea, motility issues, or that persistent post-meal discomfort that never quite resolves. And at number 1 is Gankao, Chinese licorice root, known across 2 millennia as the Great Harmonizer. No other herb appears in Chinese medicine with comparable frequency. In the Shanghan Lun, the foundational Han Dynasty clinical text, Gankao appears in more than 60% of the formulas. Classical physicians called it the Emperor's Messenger because it harmonized the actions of every other herb it was combined with, moderating the harsh, amplifying the weak, and guiding the formula into the right channels. It was the one herb every Chinese pharmacy kept in bulk, ground into a sweet golden powder that tasted almost nothing like the anise-flavored black candy sold in Europe. The best Gankao came from the arid grasslands of Inner Mongolia, where the roots grew deep and concentrated their sugars through harsh winters. The science behind Gansao is among the most extensively documented for any botanical medicine. Its active compounds include glycyrrhizin, glycyrrhetinic acid, and a dense collection of flavonoids, particularly liquoritin and isolicoritiginin. The most clinically proven form is deglycyrrhizinated licorice, known as DGL, which removes the glycyrrhizin that can raise blood pressure while preserving the gut-healing flavonoids. A landmark clinical trial from the 1980s compared DGL to cimetidine, a standard prescription acid blocker at the time, in patients with peptic ulcers. After 12 weeks, both groups showed equivalent ulcer healing rates, but the DGL patients had significantly fewer side effects. A 2018 study in Helicobacter pylori patients found that adding licorice extract to standard triple therapy raised bacterial eradication rates by roughly 20%. And a 2013 randomized trial in functional dyspepsia showed that licorice root extract reduced heartburn and post-meal discomfort scores by 50% over 8 weeks compared to placebo. A 2017 clinical study in patients with chronic gastritis found that an 8-week course of DGL reduced gastric inflammation scores on follow-up endoscopy by roughly 60% compared to a non-treatment arm, with most patients reporting near-complete relief of burning and belching by the end of the protocol. The mechanisms are multi-layered. Licorice flavonoids stimulate mucus production in the stomach, thickening the protective barrier against acid. They upregulate prostaglandin synthesis, which accelerates healing of the gastric lining. Glycyrrhetinic acid inhibits 11-beta-hydroxysteroid dehydrogenase in the gut, effectively extending the anti-inflammatory action of your own cortisol at the mucosal level. And the isoflavones directly inhibit NF-kappa B signaling, reducing the inflammatory cascade that drives gastritis, reflux, and intestinal permeability. When classical physicians called Gankao the harmonizer, they were describing in the language of their era exactly what the molecular data now show: a substance that simultaneously reduces inflammation, repairs tissue, and moderates the action of whatever else you are doing for your gut. For daily use, DGL chewable tablets taken 20 minutes before meals are the form with the most clinical support, typically 380 to 760 milligrams before each meal. The tablets are meant to be chewed rather than swallowed whole, because the healing action depends on contact with saliva and the mucosal lining itself. Traditional Gankao slices can be simmered in decoctions, but for ongoing digestive repair, DGL is cleaner, safer, and better studied. Across 2,000 years, Chinese medicine treated the gut as the foundation of every other function in the body, not a side quest. Which of these surprised you most? Was it the Tang dynasty pine fungus at number 6, or the bitter root at number 3 that stood up to a modern antibiotic in a controlled trial? Drop it in the comments. Hit like if this gave you something new, and subscribe so the next deep dive finds you